Podcasters Roundtable round 158. Should your plumber have a podcast? That's a weird question. But look, we've all heard everyone now has a podcast, right? But does that mean your plumber, your local accountant, independent coffee shop, whatever it is, whatever business is in and around you, probably only maybe exist in your city. Maybe there's a couple more in other cities. But should they have one too, right? So if you're a local business looking to get customers through your door, physically through the door, probably with a mask on, come on, is a podcast a good use of your time? So we're going to dive into that. Of course, we're going to get into some other topics. That's what we're going to springboard off of. But let's meet the roundtable. Dave Jackson, co-host. Welcome back.
Yeah, Dave Jackson from the schoolofpodcasting.com. I'm trying to figure out if my plumber needs a podcast or not. I guess it depends on who your plumber is. I'm just picturing the album art with a big butt crack on it.
I was waiting for the joke. I knew it was in there somewhere. Yep. All right. Well, I think we don't even have to mute. I don't have to bleep anything there. So good job.
Not yet.
And Marco, first time roundtabler. Welcome to the show.
Thank you. Yep. I'm the main co-host of the Ninja Rob podcast.
Awesome. And Sheldon, also first timer. Welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me. Yeah, I am the host of the Leading Equity podcast.
All right. And then towards the end, we'll get in a little bit more about what those shows are about. But as I think about intros, and I think Marco has a story in here about call to actions. I was thinking about intros today and, kind of getting right to the point, which is ironically not what I'm doing right now. But this is what we talk about, the things that you deal with as a podcaster, not me. I do what I want. But getting into the content, like how fast, Dave? And we usually talk about what a podcast is about, and sometimes I can derail a show. Like if I say Dave Jackson, School of Podcasting, tell me what that's about. Honestly, as a listener, I feel like that's the part where I'm like, skip, where's the content, right? And I think if I want to know more, I'm probably the person that sticks around. So we're going to try talking about our podcast at the end. But
there you go.
I also want to add value to the people who join the roundtable, right? So that's why I want to make sure you get the plug for your podcast. What I'm hoping is that you tell us what your podcast is. Someone in the audience says, that's interesting to me. Maybe we should go with podcast and a tagline. I think I like that because you can't always get the name, the idea of the show from the name. So anyways, we're working things out in real time. That's what we do on the roundtable. We help you figure out how to do it right while we do it wrong. How's that? That's the tagline.
There's the tagline.
Awesome. All right. Well, hey, let's address that question. So really, Marco, you inspired this question because on the roundtable, we do stories, but we used to do topics. But if you have a topic, totally open to that. And, you kind of came up with this idea about you have a local brick and mortar store, right? A shop. And you get customers through there, but you also have a podcast. So why don't you tell us a little bit about maybe what your business is and then why you have a podcast and if those two overlap.
All right. Yeah. So I own a Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu and a mixed martial arts academy, martial arts school, basically. And the podcast revolves around martial arts. And the reason myself and my podcast partners decided, or the other co-host decided to start the podcast was to solidify ourselves as subject matter experts in our field. And it's not the kind of thing that brings in a customer per se, but what it does is it adds value, but it also kind of starts connecting me with someone that's shown interest, that's come to my website, that wants to know what my schedule is, that wants me to contact them, and I'll send them a link to the podcast so that they get an idea, number one, who I am personally, but number two, what the what they could start to expect by walking through the doors in an intimidating atmosphere. Because, as an adult, walking into a mixed martial arts academy can be pretty intimidating. So I'm trying to lower that barrier to entry.
Awesome. And so, I like the idea of, you could just have the audio as a resource to potential students or new students, but instead, when I think about local podcasting, I always think the challenge is it's twofold. You're trying to communicate to a local community who's probably not the majority of people who are going to find your podcast, right? So how do you get a podcast that's meant for people sort of right around you to listen, right? So that's challenge number one. And then is it really worth it to be? It's kind of like paying for an ad that goes global, but you only need it to hit people in your city.
Right.
So obviously you're doing the work, even if you made a resource like an audio resource, you're doing the work, you're going to put it out there. So why not put it out as a podcast? But, how do you justify the time to put into making it a podcast? And then especially with like a co-host, and probably takes more time.
It's fun, number one, right?
Yeah.
Like, so we wouldn't do it if we didn't enjoy it. Right. And we get to talk about topics that we'd be talking about after training anyway. Right. So new students, how people come in, fights that are happening, competitions that are coming up. So why not record it? And we started from the inside out. So we promoted it to our, like our captive audience. We have students. So we say, hey, we have this podcast, listen to it. Then send it out to your friends that might be interested, because everybody that trains at a martial arts academy has a friend that's interested. Hey, this is my instructor's podcast. And we kind of went from there. So we had a listener base already baked in, and then we grew out from there.
And what's the challenge to sort of speaking to a local audience, but at the same time, since anyone can listen to it, speaking to everyone who could listen?
Yeah, so I think you ultimately you want to put out a good podcast, right? So we're talking about things that are relevant and that we are interested in. So when we're sending potential customers to a podcast, it's a very specific one, right? So the podcast isn't marketed to be local here to Philadelphia. Anybody around the world is going to listen to it, and they're going to get some good content out of it. There are certain episodes that we did specifically that would be great for somebody that's brand new to listen to, say like how to join a mixed martial arts academy, what to expect when you walk through the door. And that would be the first episode that we send. And then as they become enculturated to our group, they start listening more and more, and they start to get, an idea of what's going on and what the martial arts is about.
Dave, what questions do you have around how can Marco help you understand local podcasting better?
Well, I think for me, I think it's going to kind of depend on the subject of the podcast. Like in Marco's case, he's doing mixed martial arts, so that doesn't really tie into like local dining in the area. But if I was a real estate person, maybe, and I'm trying to be known as the real estate person, maybe I am also trying to build my network. So I'm going out and I'm interviewing local businesses. I'm doing the community calendar, things like that, to really make it hyper local. So I think it kind of depends on, what your, if you need, is networking, like if Marco gets let's say he makes friends with the local pizza guy. That's awesome. Maybe if they win a tournament, everybody goes and gets pizza. I don't know if that's really going to work, though. That's not going to help the body fat percentage. But
you almost sound like you're talking about advertising too. But one of the things that Marco, you said, which I'm interested in, by the way, so we'll tackle some of that. But you said part of the reason was you wanted to be like a known voice in the space, right?
Bingo.
So I think that, in that case, maybe the value is that, like, you want to do that. So you want to be known outside of even your local community. You want to be known in the community of mixed martial arts or jiu-jitsu,
right,
whatever it is. And so also, but that also could, the more that you get known, the more public you are, visible you are, you can bring that back to your local business as sort of like, as seen on this, or I went to and spoke. I was a keynote at this major conference, jiu-jitsu conference or something. You know what I mean? So
right.
I don't know. Maybe that has something to do with it.
No, but even just telling someone and they go and listen, and we're trying to put like we do it in a studio where, we have a sound engineer. Like it's pretty polished in the sense of how it sounds, but people they don't realize how easy it is to start a podcast, and we could start it with, the mics that we have in front of us right now, but it adds a level of professionalism. And to the people that listen to me, I'm just as famous as any other podcaster. Right. And he has a podcast that gets a lot of listens, right? I don't get a ton, but enough where people are talking about it in my school, and then they tell their friends. So from that standpoint, like I want to be the guy either here in California, in Texas, I want to be the guy that people listen to when it comes to martial arts. And when you are learning a very niche thing, you're looking for the experts. So if you're local to me, right, and you see, okay, he's got a podcast, he knows all this stuff, why wouldn't I want to learn from him as a student?
Sheldon, does this hit anything for you? I see you taking little notes. So
I
like
was
if you're not
taking
watching
notes.
the video, Sheldon's
Yeah.
taking notes, which is just like he's doing better than even Dave over there. It's just staring. But
I had to grab my notepad because I was like, this is pretty cool, first of all. And I guess at the end of the day, it kind of depends on what your ultimate goal is. So I've kind of heard a little bit of advertising could be a potential thing, or a little bit of being a known voice within the space. I think both of them can, like, there's benefits with all of that. I think at the end of the day, what is your return of investment, right? So most of us, I would assume everybody that does a podcast is putting some money towards each episode, whatever that looks like, editing and engineering and hosting and all those type of things. So if you're saying, look, if I can get at least one customer to come in and I have, them to start training with me because they listen to my show, to me, it's a no-brainer. It makes sense. So whether you're a mixed martial artist or you have some other brick and mortar business, to me, if you bring in at least one customer, that covers your time for putting a podcast together. You have YouTube channel. I don't know how to fix a car half the time, and I just type it in YouTube and it comes up. So to me, I could do the same thing on Apple Podcast, type in a topic, how to fix a carburetor or something. Maybe I can listen to someone tell me how to do it.
No, and to piggyback off of what Sheldon's saying, the other thing is, it'd be great to get somebody. I think all the marketing comes together, the podcast, the website, our sales funnel, like all those things. But even more importantly is it gets them, my current students, deeper into our community, right?
Mm-hmm.
They get to know me even more than the hour or 2 hours that they get to spend with me during class. So there's the other thing is what I'm doing also is raising the barrier to exit.
the barrier to exit. I didn't heard that one. I like it.
Well, yeah, because you've built that relationship, and now when they come in to say, "Yeah, I'm like this is my last month" or whatever, it's really hard to do that because you've got that relationship. So absolutely, and if they can say, "Hey, that thing that just went down, yeah, my sensei was over there and he was the person leading it," it just gives your students more things to talk about. And if I'm Googling local karate shop.
Please, don't say karate, please.
Okay, I'm sorry.
You don't speak the language, Dave.
No, I don't. But if you say that, and two of them there's 3 websites, and 2 don't have podcasts and 1 does. You want somebody who's it shows that you're up on the latest techniques.
Credibility.
Yeah,
I mean, it
exactly.
certainly helps, right? Like, at least I can get more information about what the people in the place is like, hopefully, right?
Right. And can we curse? Because hopefully, can we, or do you bleep it out?
I will bleep it out, so you can curse if you want.
All right. And then they get to see, is this guy an asshole or not?
Right.
Like even before they come in, so.
Yeah, no, that's part of it, right? I mean, it's twofold. It could be, maybe it's a good filter too, right? Like, it's like, not even about just being a jerk. It's just like, I just don't feel like I vibe with that person, which is probably pretty important when it comes to an instructor for really anything, right? So,
right. I want them to vibe with me, and I want to vibe with them. Like, I don't want it to be a one-way street.
yeah. So, related to that. And so, well, actually, Dave, you brought up, it kind of sounds like you're hitting on ideas of advertising. Do you do any of that, Marco? Is there any opportunities for local advertising? Like I said, again, we're speaking to a global audience, so I don't know that a pizza shop in Philly needs, like, you'd have to reach a lot of people specifically in Philly for that to work for the guy. But have you had any of those opportunities? Nah,
and we're so having so much fun doing it, and it's really like it's not that difficult for us and it hasn't really been that expensive that we're not looking for any of that, and we just want to put the content out that we want to put out and make our money other ways and.
Yeah, that's good too, because part of it is that your business is the sponsor, essentially, right? It could be the sponsor. But on top of that, it's not sometimes not worth it. I think it's important for people to realize, like, sometimes it's not worth it to manage another relationship. It could be more difficult to try to manage a sponsorship relationship than to just do the thing that you want to do. So.
Well, yeah, I wasn't really looking for advertising. I was just trying to think, like, how do I really make this hyper local? Right. Like, I live in Akron, Ohio. We're an hour from Cleveland, and there's we don't get any coverage. Like, that's just Little Akron, forget about them. So if I started covering the news that was local, then those people would go, oh, I love this show because not only do I get great mixed martial arts stuff, but he lets me know what's going on in town and things like that. And that's where I said it kind of depends on, like, that kind of content may mix better with depending on what you're trying to promote. So,
and back to the original fake question of the plumber having a podcast, is there value in someone like that who really it's marketing, right? You're just trying to get someone through the door locally. And like I'm saying, how many people in your town are actually going to listen to your podcast? How many people are going to find it, right? And so it's ironic that you have this online medium and that you're probably going around town tacking up your podcast on a telephone pole, right? Like, so I think it comes back down to what Marco keeps saying is that they're having fun, right? You have to just want to do it. You have to want to make the content and help be a resource, right? The plumber, honestly, in the plumber situation, a YouTube channel would be fantastic. And he'll probably get a lot of views. It won't translate into customers, but maybe even there's another business line for you there, right? Like you could have some form of digital product at that point, right? You're branching out. Like, I don't know if you just exist in your town, if you're Jim's Donuts and you only exist in Philly, if a podcast, if you're just doing it for marketing, probably not, right? You got to be doing it for something else. But
I think the places that kind of businesses that have communities, right? Like a plumber doesn't have a community, a coffee shop does, right? Where people become regulars. They want to know about the beans, where they're sourced from, what is an espresso, those kinds of things, or who are the local businesses that come and buy coffee there. And then you interview John from John's Pizza Shop that goes to Ray's coffee shop and maybe kind of do some collaborative work like that. That's where I would think maybe a local business, but not but a plumber would be tough. I agree.
I think if we limit it to just the brick and mortar idea, I think like what was said earlier is like, anyone can listen to a podcast, right? So it's accessible everywhere. But if Marco said, you know what, maybe we should start recording some of these training sessions and maybe develop an online course, or we can develop an online community that's paid subscription, those kind of things. I think we're allowing us to have more opportunities outside of just the brick and mortar piece when we have a podcast. So I think starting off small, starting off with the local mindset, and then kind of thinking, okay, how can I expand them? Man, with COVID and everything that's happened, I think a lot of our brick and mortar institutions in general had to think about that. It's like, oh, okay, my gym has to shut down for a few months. What are some alternatives? So I think if you're thinking long term, maybe that could be something to where you can have more of a presence online as well.
Yeah, I mean, that's what a lot of the gyms did, right? They all went to online training. Mm-hmm. I know Elsie Escobar from She Podcasts, she always talks about how she used to teach yoga and she would record her yoga classes. They're still online and they're still getting downloads. And she's like, they have horrible audio. It's this weird clip-on mic from like 2006. And she's like, they still get downloaded though because it's evergreen. So yeah, I could see that.
No, but what Sheldon said was right, because I didn't even think, I forgot about when we were closed during COVID. So there was another way for me to stay connected to my students, right? So that they know, hey, these are the updates. This is what's going on. This is when we plan on reopening, how we plan on reopening, those kinds of things.
Yeah, very cool. Awesome. Well, Dave, should your plumber have a podcast?
No, I don't.
I think you should have a YouTube channel. Honestly.
YouTube channel. Yeah, I'm with you. Again, I think it depends on the content, but I'm with you. Plumber, I'm going YouTube channel.
It is hard. I mean, Sheldon's going to learn how to fix a carburetor via audio, so why not unclog your drain?
I'm open to trying it. Now, if I destroy my car, then yeah, I'm taking it in. I'm gonna be upset. But why not try? If someone can give me some detailed instructions via audio, I'm down to try.
And something like that, you might be the only person in the catalog. I mean, there might be someone searching. Maybe, the key is that you don't know how people want to receive their content. So if you have content to make, I think it's really the bottom line here is like, don't do it because someone said, or that you're getting the impression that everyone has a podcast or you should have a podcast. You have to have something that you want to make. I mean, in my case, when I started in podcasting, I wanted to make podcasts because it was like, what are these things? This is amazing. How do you do it? I didn't have a topic, so I just turned that into the topic, right? But, so if you're thinking you have to be motivated by making the thing, right? I think first, and then really, I feel like, look, if your content's that good, you'll find a way to make it beneficial for your business, even if that business is only in your town, right?
Yeah. And like you said, if you're not having fun, forget it, because that's going to come across.
It'll definitely come
Quickly.
across. Yeah. If you're there for the marketing, people aren't going to follow you. Well, let's try to go to a story. Dave, you had I have questions about this one. This Kickstarter, people are making money.
Yeah, I had somebody contact. This isn't really a story, it's one of those things where on occasion I will be, I remember once when I went to PodCon in Seattle, and I walked in and some dude had elf ears on, and nobody told me. Like, I was like, all of a sudden I was like, what did I just walk into? I kind of felt like the Wizard of Oz, where it went from black and white to color. I was like, I have walked into a new world. And so, because I had cosplay. I'd never heard of cosplay in my life. And I was like, oh, well, now that I get that, I get it. So somebody contacted me this morning. They said, hey, I see where people are using Kickstarter to launch a podcast. What are your thoughts on that? My original thought was, buy a Samsung Q2U. They're $70. Like, why are people raising $70 on Kickstarter? But I went over, and it's nuts. There are people there that are making hundreds of thousands of dollars, and some of them I looked at. This is one of those where, in true podcast, it's a lot of it depends. So some of these I looked at were doing kind of NPR style journalistic deep dives. But the one I'm looking at was called PADLC, and I guess it's downloadable content. Mm-hmm. And what I really liked about this, they had $230,000 from 5,000 backers. And what I loved about this is they have a video there, and it shows this video. This is apparently something they did. And it's also, I think, maybe available as, I'm not sure exactly how many different formats, but they quit doing the podcast and people lost their minds. They're like, when are you bringing the podcast back? And people were finding the old episodes and they're like, this is really cool. They don't do it anymore. And so every time these guys went, there's video of them at conference after conference, and people like going, hey, I used to listen to the podcast. Any chance it's ever coming back? So they said, hey, if you guys want it back, here's where you can make it come back. And I'm not sure what they were looking for, what their original goal was, but I'll take $230,000 to make a podcast. So, and I went over, and there were some people that were kind of like, hey, I need, $800 to start a podcast. I was like, okay, I see that. But there were some, one lady, $23,000 to create a mommy podcast and things like that. And so part of me was confused, because I'm like, you don't need that much money to start a podcast. But I did like the idea of using this as a litmus test, because if you can't convince people that what you're going to deliver is valuable, that they're not going to part with their value, as in money, for that, well, then maybe we just stop the world from having yet another boring podcast. So that's the part I was like, oh, that's interesting. If like this is step one, raise money, and you can't raise money, I don't know. It's just one of those things. I haven't even really fully developed how I feel about the whole thing. I just didn't know this was going on.
I would, you have an agreement in the chat that not everyone should have a podcast. There were too many bad podcasts in 2013. Now there's 10 times as many bad podcasts. Your idea about a filter. I was reading through that too. And all I thought at first was, because it says during PAX, which is an annual conference, people always ask them, where's the podcast, right? So you have people demanding, like, they had a podcast stopped, and now people are like, why'd you take that away? And now they are doing a Kickstarter to bring it back so they can, they had all these rewards and stretch goals, and they didn't know what they were going to get. Essentially, they have to meet all their stretch goals. So they made a lot of work for themselves, but they also made a good amount of money going in. Yeah. Finding out. But they found out that, through that is that the demand really was there. It wasn't like two squeaky wheels on Twitter, right?
And a lot of these are hyper local. There was one called Memphis Weirdos, where they raised $2,300. There was another one about Kentucky sports, where they raised $3,000. So a lot of it is hyper local stuff. And I go back to with the media, just being the media and sucking in general. If you're in a small town, the small newspaper went out of business years ago. So this is a way to kind of serve that local, community that isn't aware of what's going on. I did see one, they were trying to raise $75,000. It was called Reveal. And that was the one I was like, 75 grand, what do you hold? And I went and watched, and it was very much kind of just super like NPR, 18 people on the team kind of thing.
Takes a lot of money, yeah.
Yeah, and they didn't raise it. They got 31,000 and it, sorry, time's out, you're done. So,
but when I was looking through it, what made me think of is, and I don't know if it's Sheldon or Marco that talked about building community, right? Or having a community, right? Or Marco, you're saying if the coffee shop is about the community that's in the coffee shop, this is something that requires you kind of coming to it with an audience, right? Like, so people are going to see this and going to be like, oh my gosh, I'll put my podcast idea on Kickstarter and I'll probably get $2,000, $3,000. You'll get $2 that your uncle chips in, right? But so like, you have to have the demand needs to kind of be there. Either you did proof of concept before, like if we went away for a year, let's do this, Dave. And then we're like, hey, Kickstarter to bring us back, which was just employed. It's like some type of scheme to just get money. But it feels like you could be successful for someone who already has a community and is thinking, would you guys like a podcast? I would like to hire an editor. Gonna need a little money. That would be great. And then just gauge interest, right? So I think that if you're getting the idea that Kickstarter is just a magic place to get money for your podcast, I think you need to bring something to it.
Yeah, that would be a no.
What I don't understand about the podcast is if it was that popular before, right, and it can generate 230 grand, like what was the disconnect? Why did they stop it if they were that they would know how many downloads or how many people listen or what their communities like why my question is, why did it go away in the first place?
Yeah, and I don't know the answer. Maybe they didn't know. Maybe they weren't on a good host. Maybe they hosted themselves. There could be a lot of reasons they weren't getting stats or didn't know how to read stats, or it was the silent majority, or it wasn't just maybe it wasn't a ton of people, but it was enough people to pitch in $10, $20, $50 and it adds up quick. Even if you're just getting a few hundred to 1,000 downloads, which you at the time think, it's not enough to keep going. But even that, I mean, it looks like, and this is sort of my idea of they really had something before they had a podcast. This is a cartoon. It's an animation of some type. It almost seemed like a very established brand of some other type of content that they couldn't sacrifice. Like that was the primary. And it's like the podcast probably took just enough time that they couldn't create the contest. Oh, that reminds me of something else that happened in the one that you sent, Dave, that I was reading, the downloadable content one, the PAX one, cartoon one, is that you can't just be a podcast. They had something very unique. So they did another podcast where they just talked, I think, about the industry or something. It's in there. We'll link to the article in the show notes and it's in the chat. But they had no idea that what people were loving so much was this other thing they're doing where they kind of just did a microphone in the room while they made the comic. So they had this process of making the comic where they just sat down and read stuff together. And when it was funny, that became the comic. That was the magic fairy dust of the podcast. That's what everyone wanted. They wanted to be in the room when the thing was created. So they also had something very special that you can't, hey, we're 4 guys. We're going to talk about plumbing. It's going to be magic. No one wants to pay for that.
But do you really want to throw money at guys that don't realize they're holding gold until it goes away? I
mean, if I like what they're doing, there's a podcast, right? There's a podcast that doesn't exist unless this one TV show is in production. And if they would just get on the mic every week and do the thing and just talk about their theories of the show, I would pay good money because it was always the best part of my week. So hands down. Yeah. And they probably have no idea. Huge podcast, huge listenership. They could probably rake in lots of coin by doing the podcast, even in the off season, and they probably have no idea. I don't know.
Yeah, they may not have known. They might have seen their numbers. Now, 5,000 backers, so that's a fair amount of people. But I think if you watch the video, I don't think they realized, like when you see things in person, like I like to take an interview that I've done and I'll write the question and I'll summarize the answer to kind of review my past episodes. And when you see it on paper, you go, that wasn't as cool as I thought it was. You know what I mean? I could have cut this answer out or something like that. And I think when they were face to face with their listeners and like according to now the video's edited, obvious, but there were a lot of people like, hey, the podcast, what do we got to do to bring it back? I think that's really kind of what hit them, because you'll see in the video, the guy's like, all right, we'll talk to Brian. We'll see what we can do. We're not promising anything, but you can tell they're just like, wow, okay, well, we'll see what we can do. So I'm with you. On one hand, if I got 5,000 people, it's hard to walk away from 5,000 people, but it's interesting. I just stumbled across it and was like, wait, people are doing this? So, and I'm with Ray. I want to point out that if you don't have, if you get 100% of nobody in your community, you still have nothing. So this is one where you got to take a community or have a really good marketing arm. I mean, I find out about Kickstarters half the time at somebody's hospital bill. And it's, my friend Bill's cousin's Uncle Joe, has lung cancer. And you're like, here's 10 for Uncle Joe. So it's going to take some marketing to get it out there too.
Yeah. And again, if you have a community and you're thinking, do I want to add this other, because you get the impression from them that they really want to do the podcast right and that they want to pay an editor and that it was a lot of work or could be a lot of work, which they're right. They may not have known their listenership, but they're right about it being a lot of work. So if you're considering adding this piece of content to an already existing brand and you're kind of like, I don't know, could be a good way to, Dave, like you said, that litmus test. Is it worth it? Right.
So I guess my question would be, do I have to be an established organization or group or have a community already before jumping into a Kickstarter, or should I because that was my thought. Because if you got 5,000, you made $230,000, like you had a following. So is that the way to go when it comes to Kickstarters? Like, I need to already have an audience? Is this for Joe Smo who's just kind of getting started and they want to do their thing? Or like, I'm assuming you have to have some sort of social proof before you even start something like this.
You don't have to. It's like a podcast. You can just do it, right? That's kind of the beauty, right? It might fail, but I think you either have an audience and a community that you're in touch with, or you have an incredible idea that would resonate with that community, and you just got to get in front of that community, right? So like if you're going to create, leadership 101 for plumbers, whatever it is, and then you get into the plumber Facebook group and it just, people are like, I really want that. They're going to support your Kickstarter, right? So you don't have to have the community if you know how to get into the community and your idea is awesome, right? Yeah,
because I usually tell people to find some people that you feel are your target audience and say, hey, I created this episode. This is my first one, and I know I'm going to tweak this, but I want to get some people who I feel would benefit from this, and you're it. So if you don't mind, could you listen to this podcast and talk about it like I'm not in the room? And then you got to ask those hard questions like, did you listen to the whole thing? If not, when did you tune out and why? What's the most memorable thing of it? And those are questions that at times, if somebody answers honestly and they go, yeah, I lasted about 7 minutes, and you're like, oh, okay, because it was 45. And you're like, why did you tune out? And they're like, well, your audio sounds like you're underwater, calling from a wind tunnel, whatever it is. Or, you spent 7 minutes talking about French toast recipes and it's supposed to be about this. So, that's a way to kind of figure out, is this going to work or not? And that might be then once you get that, then you say, okay, hey, I've talked to all these people. I've got this idea. This is what this podcast is going to be about. If you want to see it happen, I need a microphone. So here, I'm going to go Joe Rogan. I need $500 for a microphone, and I will give you a shout out or whatever. And in a way, if you think about it, Patreon is kind of, that was the whole point of Patreon, is it's crowdfunding, but it's ongoing crowdfunding. And I saw where one of the people I were looking at over have a Patreon. So I don't know, maybe it's, X amount of money from a Kickstarter to get you up and going, and then a Patreon to keep it ongoing. I just was surprised that people were getting thousands of dollars. I was like, geez Louise, holy cow. So
We have like mild debate in the chat, which
well, that's good.
yeah, that's what we want. Podcasts live forever unless the creator actively takes it down. It clutters the space, whereas bad books go out of print. Bad singers usually lose their record deal. Essentially, we've talked about this where there's just the podcast directories are littered with one episode, test 1, 2. Is this on? How we doing? It just sort of sits there.
Yeah.
Right. And then, let's see, Dan was saying that, respectfully disagree. There's no way to know if you will love what you're doing until you try it. Singers won't know they can sing unless they go for it. So kind of two issues there where, yes, I think you do have to try a thing. Like, I think I think that's based off of what we were saying that, you have to know that you love doing a thing. So a podcast, and that's part of like adding a podcast because you want to, right? You may think you want a podcast and you don't know, and you can try. And there's two separate issues about trying something, it didn't work, and then it sort of litters the space. One's more of a technical problem that I think we have. Yeah, the hard part, right? So I don't know. And I think even Apple recently probably had to do something about. They used to have like this auto approval thing from Anchor, which I don't think is happening anymore. So it caused a lot of problems. So you have two different issues there: personal motivation and knowing what you want to do versus a technical limitation of the platform to get rid of clutter.
Yeah, and I think if you have to pay me to make my podcast, I'm not sure how that works. I know my first podcast for musicians I had done for about a decade, and I was kind of running out of steam, and I had new music added and new branding, and I was like, oh, this is and it just didn't do it. And I think if somebody came in and said, hey, we'll give you $100 an episode to do this, I had said everything there was to say at that point. So it'd be interesting to see, especially for these shows where they're bringing them back, and how many reboots have actually worked. When you think about that, Will and Grace lasted one season. I'm trying to think what else has been rebooted.
I think in this case, it works because the audience just wants more of what they were getting.
Right.
And like you're saying, like sometimes a show just runs its course. But in this case, again, it's that unique feature that they have of watching the sausage get made, right? Which is what they had. And was the thing they didn't even realize what people wanted, right? And that's that whole thing of like trying segments on your podcast. Someone emails you and says, or a lot of people email you and say, we don't really like your book review section. Can you just go more into the movie section or something, right? And you learn over time what people actually want. And hopefully you learn, hopefully get that feedback. It can be hard to get. And then you make adjustments. I don't always say like do things because people tell you, because you'll get those squeaky wheels. It should be this blend between what you want to do and what the audience wants. So
right. Yeah, Jonathan Oakes is a great example of that, of trivia warfare. And he has this trivia show, and he and his co-hosts are playing, and somebody said, like, how do I want to play trivia against you? And he went, I have something that the audience wants. And so hence, Jonathan has a very successful Patreon account because he had something that his audience wanted. And it wasn't like, hey, give me $20 a month and I'll go buy a new microphone. Yes, that somewhat benefits the audience if your audio is horrible, but in most cases, that's really more of a benefit for you.
What, Marco, you have a couple stories here. So this more than 1,000 shows are using Apple Podcast paid subscription. What's that about?
Yeah, it just seems like the paywall is getting higher and bigger, and it seems like people's content is. Or they're figuring out that if you pay for it or you get people to pay for it, that's how you're going to keep going. So I don't know how the small independent podcast is, how they get involved in something like that. Like how does a Ninja Rob or, what Sheldon does, or are we good candidates for that? Or does it have to be hyper specialized, or do we need to be, because I looked at the list and I'd never heard of 99% of the podcasts, and the other ones I heard of were big media companies. So it was just very interesting, but also somewhat confusing.
Well, there's different tools there's Supercast, there's Glow.fm, which is owned by Libsyn. There is Memberful, I keep hearing about. So if you want to do a premium podcasts. There are tools to do that. And the beautiful thing is, they will give you your customers' information. So if you join up at Supercast and later want to move to Glow, you can do that because you have your customers' information, and they're not going to take 30%. So that's the beautiful thing. Where with Apple, you have no idea who your customers is because they're not your customers. They're Apple's customers, to which I say, no. And you don't get any of their information. So now I have yet to subscribe to a premium podcast on Apple. It better be drop dead, simple, stupid, easy for me to give them 30%. So
I think that's the key, right? Is removing all of the business back in. That's why you may opt into something like that. Not to mention that you're in a major, that like you're in Apple, right? Like you're in the ecosystem.
And I've been playing with the value for value thing with Adam Curry's working on. I got to meet Dave Jones at Podcast Movement, and I said, pulling up my Zap account, I have $54.09 in Satoshis on my from my School of Podcasting app. So that's
you said a lot of words. I don't know what any of it means. But.
Yeah, but basically, when you listen to my podcast there's an app that just came out in the iOS store called Fountain that makes it super easy. That as you listen to the episode, you are giving me like 1/1,000,000th of a Bitcoin.
Bitcoin is Satoshi. Yeah. So
that's another way to make.
How does this? I don't care about the app, but how are they not going to die in 2 months by giving people money?
Well, I'm assuming somewhere in there the app has a feature that you can make clips, which is kind of cool. But to do that, you need to give them. They have a subscription model.
Mm-hmm. All right.
I think it's like $2 a month. So
I guess at least they have a way of getting money.
Yeah, that's the whole. Free is not a good business model. That is still the case. The last time I checked.
Right, Sheldon, are you doing any monetization with your podcast at all? Like anything?
No, so I mean, my podcast is how I run my business.
Okay.
So I consult based off of the podcast.
Bingo.
There you go.
So I'm the sponsor. So the podcast is called Leading Equity, and I run the Leading Equity Center. So I mean, I'm mentioning that on every episode. I've been approached, have this random detergent popping in the middle of your show, and I just don't want to interrupt someone's experience, their listening experience with something Colgate or another company that has nothing to do with what I do. I rather just advertise myself. So if I have a product or if I have an upcoming event, I'm mentioning it on the show. The trick is kind of like what was mentioned earlier. Is like, am I going to spend 7 minutes of a listener's time sharing about my latest and greatest product that, maybe they just came to, I heard the title of your show. That's what I want to hear about. I'm not going to purchase anything from you, but I got to get through the 7 minutes or however many minutes of time it is to listen to the actual content that I came here for. And that's the challenge that I usually have, but I don't have any monetization happening behind my podcast.
Well, anytime if you have a story and you can tie that story into, here's what I learned from that thing I just did, that's like gold. I was just listening to Danny Osmond, another guy that I caught up with at Podcast Movement. He's an editor, and he just hit episode 100. So he did an episode on what he did, and he was talking about how he joined some mastermind that was, you had to give him like your firstborn, and he was like, yeah, that didn't work. He goes, but I did get 2 really good clients out of it, so it kind of did. So it was all this stuff that's like, here's what I worked, and insights and things like that. So anytime you can share a story on what's going on in your life, and here's what you can learn from that, it lets people get to know you. And for me, anytime I hear that, I always see like this person is actively trying to stay up to date with what's going on in their industry, which I always appreciate.
And I asked that, Sheldon, of you, which that's a great model, right? Like podcasts work fantastically for getting exposure to what else you have to offer, right? Like they're giant billboards and proof of concept. Like why would you take lessons from me, or why would you consult with me? Well, here's like 100 hours of free reasons, right? Like prove it to me, right? Which is great. And you're helping at the same time. But I don't know, are you aware of because Apple Podcast subscriptions they're fairly new. So you can put content behind the paywall. people can just press the button in the podcast app, or I don't actually know how it works. And that content is monetized for you. Have you considered anything like that?
So I think I'm kind of like with Dave. The 30% is getting me. So I use Kajabi, and so I literally have all.
Uh-oh.
It's the magic word.
I wasn't going to go to that story, but now I guess we don't have a choice.
I did jump ahead. Because I saw Dave had something, but I use Kajabi in order to run my show. And so, and the Leading Equity Center. And so, yeah, I can put all my episodes. I actually have them all available, categorized and everything, up to the first 200 that are available. So that, to me, I have it out for free for now. But if I do decide that I want to monetize it, I get everything back as opposed to only getting a percentage.
Yeah.
So, I mean, it brings up the elephant in the room, this Kajabi thing.
All right.
I don't care about apps on this show. I don't care about stuff that's going to be dead in 2 months, especially when Dave says, be careful. But man, I don't know.
All right.
Sheldon's using it successfully, and it's working for him. So, actually, Sheldon, why don't you tell us what Kajabi is? So people are like, you don't know what that means.
So I started off. So when I started podcasting, I started with WordPress. I wanted a website to go along with the podcast show. I honestly didn't start the podcast as a business with having a business in mind. It was just kind of fell into my lap kind of situation. And so it was just because I wanted to learn more how I could be better as an educator. And so I ended up wanting an all-in-one type of approach. So Kajabi, it hosts my website. It has all my online courses, all my online products. It also does all my email marketing. So it's all in one. And I like that model. It's a little pricey for me. But I'm at a place where it's okay. But that's my only downside of it is the cost. But other than that, I mean, again, having everything in one place, I can tag my, I start off with like MailChimp, and I start off with like kind of putting things together, WordPress, MailChimp, and then I was like, well, and Teachable, I was like, why don't I just get something that does literally everything that I needed to do in one place? And so that's why I went with Kajabi. And I have a love-hate relationship sometimes, but I mean, their customer service and anytime I need support is hands down the best support I've ever gotten.
Yeah, well, Dave considers Kajabi a clueless company. I don't know if that's your statement or
when it comes to podcasting. So may I play the jingle, Ray?
I suppose, yes.
And now it's time for a power rant.
And again, nothing wrong.
A jingle, Dave.
I want to hear this. I want to hear this.
So nothing against Kajabi, the marketing, everything that you just said, the email, the blog, perfect. When somebody jumps into my space, the first thing I'm going to ask them is, hey, I see you're doing podcasting. That is so great. If I come on your platform and I decide, hey, wow, you're not AAB certified, your stats are a little wonky, you know what? I love the all-in-one thing. I might come back to you in a year when you really kind of get up to speed. You're a little early, out of the oven a little too soon. So I want to move over to Captivate or Blueberry or Libsyn or whoever. I want to move. And you know what they're going to say? Oh, just import. This is what they told me. Their tech support said, just import the stuff to your new feed and you're good to go. And I went, no, you're not. You've got to do this thing called a 301 redirect. And in non-geeky terms, it's a change of address. So what happens is right now when I start Apple Podcasts, it goes to your Kajabi feed. Perfect. Okay, now I move. If I start Apple Podcast, it hits the change of address that says, hey, they moved to Blueberry or Libsyn or whoever, goes over there, updates the app. So the next time I fire up the app, it goes to the new host. And right now, Kajabi is saying, what's a 301? And that makes me it makes me, I'm like, why are you in podcasting if you don't understand? And their tech support is like, no, we understand how RSS feeds work. And I'm like, apparently not. Like, that, or you just don't, and I understand that they may be more in the realm of exactly what you're talking about. I want to put my podcast behind a paywall and keep all the money. Absolutely. But if you're going to be in podcasting, you should probably give your customers a way to leave in the event they want to.
I wish. Do you have a jingle that goes something like 2005 podcast and problems.
Yes, exactly.
It's so funny how
We do now.
This is the yeah, that's right. No, don't let me. No, we'll never play that again. On loop. This is the thing that hangs up every podcast company, quotes, or big giant quotes on that. That comes in the space. It's always about the can I get out, without ruining my podcast.
Right.
And it's a bit of a sore part for me because working at Libsyn, I have seen so many companies come in, usually somewhere in the religious space, and I'm just pulling these names out of my butt. Something like Sermon Pod or, I don't know, Jesus Cast or some sort of like, hey, look at us. We're getting into podcasting because it's hot. Look at us. We can, and especially that audience is, and I'm painting with a very, very wide brush. Sometimes the religious audience isn't the most technical people on the planet, and they just think it's cool because you like Jesus too. And so they jump on board, and then it's horrible. These people don't know what they're doing. And these people figure it out, and they're like, hey, I want to move to Libsyn. And I go to their tech support, and I'm like, hey, the customer doesn't know how to do a 301 redirect. We need to have this redirected. And their tech support goes like, a what? A 301, huh? And I'm just like, oh my God, not again. So I see this on a it's like at least once a year, a couple times a year, depending on who, the hotter podcasting gets, the more companies get involved. My favorite thing about a company, especially if it's a consultant, is when you go to the About page and it doesn't say who you're working with. I'm like, but I'm trying to build a relationship with you, and it just keeps telling me how great the company is. I'm like, yeah, but who's the company? Where are you at? What's your experience? So, all right, I will take a deep breath. I'll drink some tea. We'll be okay.
So is your main concern more on not having access to an RSS feed through Kajabi?
No, the ability to redirect it.
Okay.
I'll put an example. When I wrote
the ability
my book,
to take your audience that you earned and take
with
them
you.
With you.
Yeah, so if you're like, look,
even if Kajabi worked for you, fantastic.
Yeah.
Let's say it's beautiful, but you're just going to somewhere else because.
I'll give you an example. Squarespace has a podcast, service along with their website. And when they first came out, I don't know if this is still the case, but when it first came out, their feeds were a little fragile. A lot of people, their feeds are breaking, and they would say, hey, I want to move to Libsyn. And I think they did have a 301 redirect, but they keep their website on Squarespace. So if somebody says, man, I love all the email marketing and the course, and I like, but I want to move my podcast over to another actual podcast host. Right now, Kajabi's like, and they have contacted me since that article came out and said, hey, it's on the roadmap. And I'm like, good to hear.
Wait,
guys.
was this your article?
Yeah, that's my article.
So you did actually call them clueless. All right, I just went on the record.
Yeah, so yeah, and that's one of those where I probably should have sat on that a day. But that came to me, I was emailing them in the morning, and by 4:00 that article was out, and I was like, I should probably sit on this one a bit because I was, like I said, because they say like RSS isn't domain based, and I was like, that's kind of like saying swimming isn't water based. I was like, it's like it just was like you can sing within your key, and people will think you have a limitless range.
Right.
But man, when you go outside of that range, everybody's like, ugh, and they went way outside of their range. I'm like, stick with the marketing email stuff, kids. Because
let me ask you though, Dave, do you think that they're going after the podcaster, or are they marketing this to their already established customer base and then working out from there?
I think it's a little bit of both. What they've done is you have that person that said, and everybody in here talk about Kajabi is like, I'm thinking about Podia because Kajabi seems a little pricey. So now you found a way to say, hey, you know how you're paying $20 for Libsyn? Guess what? It's not anymore over here. Bring your podcast over here and save yourself $20 a month. So I think that's probably it's another selling point. So, and then for those people that they have them, they're like, hey, like you have your stuff there and you're like, hey, bring your podcast over. And what did you talk about earlier? Barrier to exit. I don't want to leave Kajabi because I got my podcast on. And they put up a pretty big barrier to leave because you can't take your audience with you.
It's all in a silo, right?
Squarespace, SoundCloud, Blog Talk Radio,
TalkShoe.
Yeah, TalkShoe. This is just like if you're going to offer podcasting services, you have to. This is like critical, right? It's critical because people are going to come and go, and you don't want to lose the audience that you've.
Kajabi's not going to come and go. No. Maybe the podcasting service would go.
No, the people are going to come and go through your service, and so don't it's just if you're going to get into podcasting, you probably need to understand some very core fundamentals of a podcaster, and I need to be able to move my audience when I leave.
Dave, in your article, you go, what is it? Master of jack of all trades, master of none. Yeah, but the rest of the quote goes, but better than a master of one.
Ah, there you go. So yeah, and for the record, I know a lot of people that are really happy with Kajabi, and I'm not bashing the company. I'm upset that they came into podcasting without apparently completely understanding or putting out, this. If they had said this is podcasting beta, I would have been like, oh, okay, it's not fully cooked yet. But they're like, here it is. Enjoy podcasting. And I was like, and seriously, that was the first question I sent to them. And I was like, and to their credit, their support was like quick and to the point. So it's like
they have good support.
Yeah. I was just like, they just missed one thing. It's like, guys, and I'm with you. I don't think they're out to put Captivate or, Buzzsprout or anybody out of business. It's just a value added. Like, hey, we added this service. And I was like, you added about 90% of it to you missed one little part, and that little part is it's the oil in the car. It's a big part. So and that's fine. There will be those that we've seen many a company come and go, and so
but how many of these services were locked dead, wrapped up in a beautiful bow when they first rolled out? Blueberry, Buzzsprout,
that's true.
Yeah. So
yeah. Well, that's, to me though, it's, I don't know, it's kind of like launching for me again, because I see the pain it causes. It's like launching a bicycle with one wheel. That's called a unicycle, Dave. But if it's built as a bicycle, you're like, hey, like, where's the other tire? And they go, oh yeah, we're working on that. Or if they go, what do you mean, what other tire? That's the part that got me, when they're like, what do you mean, what other tire? What do you mean, don't make, I forget what the result was.
That's the important part, is that when you contact, it's that they didn't understand it even when it was brought to them. So and this is just a public feature request. That's all.
Yeah, that's all.
Straighten it out.
And it's already on the roadmap. So that's, I was just surprised.
Roadmap. Word is getting tossed around too much lately for people who don't have something I want. It's on our roadmap.
Yeah.
It feels better. All right. We're doing good. We have any other stories? What's your call to action? I was actually interested in this. Marco, you put this, what's your call to action story here? Because it wasn't really, I don't know if it was a story so much as it was something you were thinking about. I'm wrong.
So it was an article, but it's, don't get me wrong. We have to market, and we have, products that we need to sell or memberships that we need to sell, but we don't always have to be marketing. We don't always have to be asking for the subscription or the review or the like. Like when we're doing our podcast, it's like, it's about, I teach guys how to fight, but when we're doing the podcast, it's about our art, right? It's about talking and the art of podcasting, and then everything else comes second. And I can't stand podcasts when it's like 10 minutes on the front where I'm like, I just, like you were talking about earlier, I just want to get to what I want to listen to. I don't care. I'm not going to buy anything from any of your sponsors, but like with Ray's stuff, like his YouTube channel and, his Amazon affiliate links, like, yeah, you know what? Boom. It was value. I clicked the link. I bought a Tascam DR40 and a DR70, right? Based on that. So you built a community, and then I feel tied in, but I'm not going to buy, some mushroom tech because Joe Rogan's sponsored by them. So it's just, it gets a little annoying.
And so this article is mostly about call to actions and just having them, and maybe how many, and this is something I've talked about before and something I think about all the time. Like, and we've discussed it on this show. In fact, I think we might have done a whole round sort of centered around the idea of, like, I know I've asked a question because I'm always curious, like, where do you put your call to action? What is your call to action? Do you have like 5 things? You follow us on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, smash the like button. Hey, if you want to go over, like, how many, like, I've tuned out after like the second time you said bloobly bloop, TikTok me this, like, it's over. Right. So call to action is, well, it can be whatever you want. So like, where do you put it? How many? I don't know. Sheldon, let's just learn by example. Like, Sheldon, what do you do? What is your call to action? You're talking about how your business is, you probably want people to reach out to you to consult with you, right?
Yeah, I have my standard outro, which has, follow me on X,
Right.
On such and such on the website, and that gets thrown out. But I try to keep my shows on the content unless I have a launch that's happening or I have an event, something like that. I don't every episode mention, oh, sign up or email me or here's my newsletter. I don't do that every episode unless, again, I have something coming up. Maybe I should do that more. And again, it was always just the time. How much time do I spend?
It's tough, right? Because I mean, here's the funny thing: we hear it every time. Smash that like button, hit the subscribe. Because if you don't ask, like, it does work. It works, and like when you resist it and then you do it, and you're like, damn it, it works so good. Like, it's very hard. Like, if you don't ask, you typically don't get, or you don't get as much. Dave,
the thing I hear, and I understand why, because the minute we start promoting ourselves, we feel like a used car salesman. No offense to used car salesman, but it sounds like this. It's like, hey, if you like the show, like, you can, like, maybe, I don't know, if you want to, you don't have to, but like, if you could, like, I don't know, tell a friend or something. And my favorite is, my website is .com. And you, like, if you have to, whatever. Okay, thanks so much. Bye. Yeah. And the reason for that is they feel like they're selling. And everybody thinks of the used car salesman. Again, no offense to used car salesman. But what's that typical default of the bad salesperson is selling you a bucket of bolts, to which I go, is your podcast a bucket of bolts? And they go, no, I worked really hard on it. Well, then don't worry. Like, and the people I've talked to that get boatloads, number one, please quit saying reviewing my show helps me get found. That has been proven over and over that is not true. It's social proof, but it doesn't help in the algorithm. But if you slowly, specifically say, hey, I want to thank you so much for listening to the Podcasters Roundtable. You've made it to over an hour already. And if you know somebody that would have liked this round, could you do me a favor? If you're on your phone right now, if you just like swipe up right now, there's probably a share button there in the bottom or right-hand corner. If you could share this with one person, man, it would make me and Ray so happy. We just want to help as many podcasters as we can. I really do deeply appreciate that. Our website, by the way, podcastersroundtable.com. We'll see you next week with another round. Boom. Slowly, because people go, I wish I could afford like a marketing team. You have one. They're free. It's called your audience. You have to, Ray said it, when you say subscribe to the bell and smash the whatever, you got to ask for it. And I understand why people don't. I really do. But you got to.
And it's about how you do it. I make mine super short and, get to the point. Like I always want to, I used to work as a cashier in a supermarket, and some lines are really slow to get to, and people specifically would come through my line because they'd be like, you just get me out of here. Like, I just want to go home. Like, we don't have all these like long conversations, but you're nice. So be nice and get people out. Like, try to do both things. But, Sheldon says he's got it at the end. Dave, you're talking about the end. If you go look at your retention stats, as soon as you indicate, you're like, if I'm like, hey, well, it's been an hour, people are just like, oh, he's ending. I'm out. They're gone. They're not hearing that. So where to place that call to action? And I think that's important, right, Marco? Like, front loading is baloney, because the people are going to take action on your whatever you want them to do. Subscribe or share with a friend, or buy this bleach thing you shouldn't eat, but it's a pod, whatever. Like, whatever it is you want to do. That was a weird reference. They're not doing it in the beginning. Those people are, or they're just, you're not even giving them the chance to show them why they would do that, right? So maybe even like in Sheldon's case, like, you're not doing it every episode. You probably should, maybe, and it probably should be earlier, right? And Dave, you have the School of Podcasting, so how do you blend? Because you're fantastic at serving your audience, and you're all about value. So how do you blend this? I want you to join the School of Podcasting.
I used to do it at the end. And again, the minute you say, hey, thanks so much for tuning in, don't forget.
You take a long breath and it's over. He's ending. I'm out.
So when I promote the School of Podcasting, I promote it in the middle. At the very beginning, I spit out a coupon, realizing that I have not given you any value yet. But the reason for it's at the very beginning. If somebody goes, wait, what was that coupon? Oh, it's at the very beginning. So they can listen to like 12 seconds to get my coupon. So that's how I do it. I try to I don't have like a pre-recorded 30-second spot. I try to tie it into whatever the heck the current subject is. We were talking last week. Now, right now, I have a sponsor, so I'm not promoting me. I'm promoting my sponsor. But we were talking about having all of your ads on one page on your website. And in this case, my sponsor's Pod Page. And I'm like, hey, you know an easy way to do that? Pod Page. So I try to make each ad relevant to what the heck we're talking about. So it's not like, hey, we're talking chicken, chicken, chicken. And all of a sudden I'm like, hey, guess what? Fish out of nowhere. And people are like, what? So I try to have it seamlessly blend into that. And Jordan Harbinger's really good at that. He's right now his wife's pregnant with her second kid, and he has some sort of magnesium pill or something like that. And he tied into this story about how his wife's legs hurt and she started taking magnesium and now they don't. And I was like, that was a brilliant way to just tell a story. I get to a little glimpse of what's going into the world of Jordan. And, you know, before you know it, the sponsorship was over. But I have an app. I use Overcast, and it starts Conan O'Brien about 7 minutes in and cuts him out about 5 minutes to the end, because at the end, he just does a recap of what I just heard. Well, I just heard it. I don't really need a recap. I was there too. And the first probably 10 minutes are nothing but commercials. So I don't hear the pre and post rolls. So those are great. They're, you know, I know there are services out there that'll give you pre and post roll, but if you do that really, really regular, people can program their apps to skip them. That's why, to me, the gold is the mid roll.
You have 30-second skip, and people are going to use it. So if you don't find a way to make it compelling or valuable, I just hit the button 3 or 4 times, right? And so, you know, it's funny too, is because there's plenty of podcasts where it's, you know, where the sponsorship's coming, and I know it's going to be 3 minutes, and I'm like hitting that button, like just to get, and just waiting for what you can tell is, even when they do it well, you can tell what ad voice is and what content voice is, right? And so, but once in a while, they're so funny in their ads that I'll listen, and those things are in my brain. Like I'm like, you know what? Maybe I do need a mattress.
What was the tour you were on? Ray went on tour with somebody who's the sound guy, and people are like shouting out, like, you know how like you go to a Skinner concert and they're shouting out Freebird?
So,
and like,
so
tell that story.
So I went on tour with Pod Save America and that whole crew, and sell out Chicago theater, just crazy, right? So their fans are, you know, lots of fans could sell out a big theater, and we'd do the show, and what we would do, there would be a sponsor break, and they would just say like,
Blue Apron.
But then the crowd would just get upset. They're like, do the ads, because they're just so funny, right? That these guys are like natural comedians, and they'd riff, and people love the ads. And so it's like, well, we don't do the ads in the live show. Like it's inserted later. Like actually, I would like gather the guys in like a dressing room that was like 4x4, because the acoustics was better in that room that I could find in this theater, and we'd do the ads before the show, because it was very timely. I mean, they were very much like tied into current events. So, but the audience would get so upset. And I mean, that's something you have to create, right? Like that was demand. That was part of the comedy of the ads, was part of the show for a lot of the people. And I don't even know that they realized how much until you showed up in front of an audience, and that audience is saying, give us the thing.
MeUndies, come on!
MeUndies. Tell me about your underwear. Are they edible? I'm buying that.
No.
And we don't have any call to actions, and our ending is just abrupt. I point to my co-host, and he says peace, and the episode's over. So, but the only time that the only times that we've had call to action is when we were coordinating a trip to Brazil, and we would point people to the website and say, hey, if you want to come with the Ninja Rob podcast to Brazil to train Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu here, or do you want to come? We put on a free seminar where we both taught. It was like 70 people showed up, which is, you know, it's a big seminar for, you know, live in person learning martial arts. But other than that, we're just doing our thing with, you know, almost like we don't give a crap about the call to action. We just want to put the content out,
which is also cool. But the thing is, what you do give a crap about is that it reaches the people you want it to reach. Like we don't put this stuff out because we don't care that people listen. Like we do want to reach the people we want to reach. So the truth of it is that if you asked to do a thing, the audience is going to do it more than they're going to do it when you don't ask, right? Even if that's just like, tell your other friends who do jiu-jitsu, we exist, and they'll do it. And then you're reaching the community that you're building for. Like, so I think there probably is some value in at least doing something, right? Like I get it, because I struggle with that. I'm like, I I don't like standardized intros, even though I do it here like a little bit. Cut to the chase. Like I always want to cut to the chase. It goes back to that cashier thing where like you want to get out and go home.
And I sell memberships. Like I'm in front of somebody asking them for money. So I don't want to always be asking for something.
Right. But this is the problem that Dave's talking about. Like even when you're like, I'll do it, but then you do it and you're like so not wanting to do it that you're just like, well, maybe, please do it.
Everything doesn't have to be a Leo Laporte 4-minute Audible ad.
No.
You know, you can just say, hey, if you like this book for free, go to blah, blah, blah.com/free book and get it today. You know, Leo goes on for hours sometimes. So it could be simply as, hey, if you want to get involved with, you know, jujitsu, I won't say karate or kung fu, you know, come visit us at blah, blah, blah.com. And, you know.
Yeah, I think it's about making what is valuable to you. To you, the community is valuable. To you, growing the audience in the community and really reaching, that's valuable. So if that's what you extract value from, like get more of it. Like literally just, I think people don't realize, you're like, oh yeah, you know what? I have a friend that either is thinking about it, getting involved, wants to do jiu-jitsu, or loves it and doesn't listen, doesn't even know we exist. Maybe you don't talk about it. I mean, a lot of the success of your show is going to be word of mouth. A lot of those people are going to share it with their friends, but sometimes you just need a reminder. And that's what happens on YouTube is I'm sitting in front of YouTube and someone says, hit subscribe. And I'm like, oh yeah, hit the button. Like, it's not like they don't want to, or they didn't think of it. But again, just what is valuable to you? The community is valuable. So how can you make that community bigger? How can you get more people the information that you're trying to share? I think is
well, and you can also pull stories from your community. That creates the fear of missing out. So when you can say, one of my students came up to me today and asked this question, and I thought, you know, that'd be a good topic for a podcast. Right there. You've admitted I have, you know, it's like I had a friend of mine that said, I'm not getting any speaking gigs from my podcast. I said, I've listened to every episode. I've never heard you mention that you even do any speaking. And again, what did she say? I don't want to be all salesy. And I go, all you got to do is say, I was speaking at a high school to a bunch of students about such and such. And a student came up to me and said, and I thought that'd be a good idea for a podcast. Boom, your audience now knows that you talk to high school kids, you're, you know, whatever it is. It doesn't have to be this Sunday kind of stuff. You can just work that in there, and all of a sudden your audience goes, oh, I didn't realize you had a membership site. Oh, I didn't realize, you know, but we don't, and I totally get it. Look, I am the worst at this myself. I've had people that say, wait, you have a book? And I go, yeah, you know, I don't want to, yeah. So I totally get that.
And, you know, I'm talking about like, oh, don't put it at the end, but maybe it is at the end. Like, it's fine. Like, your hardcore audience, they're into all of it.
Yeah.
And they're the most likely people. Like, if it is something that you're like, look, we want to grow this community. We want more people to be in the conversation about jiu-jitsu. Share, like, go find someone, share it, put it on your Facebook feed, whatever. Like, that can work at the end, because the person who is listening to the end is the type of person who's going to spread the word about something they love. They also want you to, like, still do it. Like, and for some people, I can't even tell you, like, several times I've thought about the roundtable not existing anymore, just because it's like, man, we've talked a lot of things. It's hard to gather people every couple of weeks. And like, and then always something happens here, or email comes in and be like, dude, I've listened to the show forever. I'm like, why have you never reached out? I didn't even know that. And, or there's like, that topic, I learned so much. And it's like, nope, can't stop. Like, that was the fuel. Just a little drip in the tank was enough to keep the show rolling. So
no, you just had me, you know, you just gave me an idea where like we could promote a seminar, right? Or a group introductory lesson. Hey, bring your friend to the Ninja Rob seminar if they've never done martial arts before, you know, like that kind of thing, where then go to this website, enter your information. There's another way we could leverage what we're doing.
Or make the call to action like something that's just like, it's more like it's a call to action to like do something that has nothing to do with your show, right? Like, right, go out and, you know, like clean up trash. I don't know what it is. Like, go help someone who's homeless. Like, do something. Like, there's a space, and you're talking to an audience. Like, maybe it has nothing to do with your show, but if you're helping someone else, that could really come back.
The best one ever, Bob Barker. Have your
spayed
pet spay neuter your pet. You're like, what does that have to do with
about? Yeah.
It's like,
Was he on the board or something? Why did that happen? Why he was on the board?
Yeah, the Price is Right out of nowhere. Like,
But you never forget. That is the thing. It's funny how you remember the climbing dude up the mountain who falls off, and then
right.
and then spade and neuter your pets. Oh my gosh, that's so funny.
Because we all heard it 8,000 times.
Yep. Yeah. So like use that community in that space for good. Like, and I'm not saying you're not doing good with your podcast, but like you could do a call to action that has nothing to do with your show, but that helps the community at large. So, well, I think we got through all our topics. And so we didn't. So like for anyone who's left over, if you're still listening, this is not a call to action. I actually want to know a little bit more. We've mentioned words like equality and jiu-jitsu. Like Sheldon, what is your podcast about?
So my show again is called Leading Equity. When you hear the word equity, sometimes you think about like housing and stuff like that, mortgages. Yep. Mine's a little different from an educational standpoint. You know, you do have equality. It's kind of like giving everybody the same thing, but equity, especially when it comes to education, is more of making sure that individual needs are being met. So, what does this child need? What does this child need? It may not be the same thing that every other child was getting, but this student might need a little bit extra time. This other student might need just some support with their reading, and so I just provide a lot of tools and resources to help our educators out there to make sure that they're meeting the individual needs of students.
All right. So it's your target audience would be educators.
Correct.
Awesome. But do you get feedback from your audience? Do you find that like people who are not educators listen?
It's not really. I'm pretty niche. It's mainly educators. And it's K through higher education as well. It's not just like your K-12. I have professors and, I get a lot of research guests that come on that have published something, and then we kind of go over that article. But yeah, I'm pretty niche. I don't get a lot of people outside of the educational realm.
Cool. So then helping this audience, what would you say is the best way that people find out about your show?
I think if you are interested in learning more about diversity in general, this would be a good show for you to kind of learn a lot more about it. But you can definitely find my stuff at leadingequitycenter.com.
Do you come up for diversity? Like if I'm going to type that into iTunes or Apple Podcasts?
I don't search. I don't know.
Right.
Maybe I haven't.
What's the number one way? What's the number one way you get the word out? Like, how do you market your podcast, or do you not market? It just does its own thing.
I mean, I'm on Instagram at Sheldon Eakins. I also have a Twitter. But other than that, yeah, I my email list. Again, Kajabi does all my stuff, so I just kind of keep spread the word that way.
Nice. All right. I think there's a lot. I think there's some opportunity there. Get the word out. All right. Well, hopefully this helps. We get one listener. That's
one
huge.
listener.
One listener at a time. Marco, what is, you told us a little bit, but specifically, what do you guys cover on your show?
Yeah, so the Ninja Rob podcast, it started mainly, we talk about martial arts in the beginning, and now we're 115 episodes in. So
wait, ninja's okay, but karate's not okay?
Well, because Ninja Rob's an actual person.
Ah.
So,
wait, who's Ninja Rob?
Ninja Rob is a unqualified martial arts instructor in a very bad neighborhood that one of the guys on the show learned from as a young man. And he relates this story, and it's hilarious.
That's funny.
And we decide when we started the podcast, we go, this has to be the Ninja Rob podcast.
All right. So we're helping users now here. We're helping listeners of the roundtable, because people are not searching Ninja Rob.
Correct.
Like, how are they finding, like, that's hilarious, right? So the challenge for a show like that, it uses a name that is like, doesn't really tell you what the show is. Like, the challenge is, how do people find me? So what do you do with that?
Right. So again, not to sound like, we don't care, but we're like, this is what we wanted, right, and this is what we were gonna put out there. And we marketed it to our students, right? To the people that we know. And then from there, through our social media and the website, and we're not putting like crazy effort into it from a that standpoint, but we're still here 2 years later.
I put no effort into this show. All right, the truth is out. Okay, the roundtable could do a lot better. So I ask these questions, and I'm trying to help people who think of these things and actually want to do better. But mostly, I want to get tips from you guys. Like, if you guys have done something that has been successful, like, that's how this audience learns. I do nothing, so like, that's why I bring other people on and learn from them. But so I get look at this show it doesn't have an intro. Dave brought in a stinger today. We're 158 episodes in. That really hasn't happened before. Okay, I was shocked by that. There's no production value. It doesn't get it edited outside of the thing that I make sure it's proper for a podcast delivery. And I throw a call to action at the end, which is not following any good advice, right? That I'm even given here. So I totally get that. But I do think that, because what's cool is that you do develop a community and you find people, oh my God, who listen. If you have people who listen every week, they're finding it extremely valuable. And you want to also reach the guy or the lady down the street who also wants that, but didn't know you existed, right? So sometimes it can be hard to market, and even you're just like, look, I just want to do the thing. We're 3 guys and a woman talking about this thing, and we just do it. That's cool. If it gets it out there and you're doing the thing, perfect. But hopefully we can help you grow that thing, and then more people could enjoy it. So, but wait, so what is so I derailed with the ninja thing, which is great. I love that. What's the show?
So we, the Ninja Rob podcast, so the beginning is we just talk, we haven't seen each other. We catch up, right? And we, some jokes and have some fun, like what's going on with life. And the co-host, we get into a lot of arguments when it comes to fights and,
Debates.
techniques and, those kind of things. And our audience loves it. They're like, oh, we love it when you guys argue, because it's a real thing. And then we have some bits that we do, like hate on site. So things that we see that it's like, if I see this, I instantly hate it, or, love on site, that kind of thing. But so it's sandwiched between some of the bits is the martial arts, the lunch meat of martial arts, right? Fights that are coming up, techniques. We'll also do, we take questions, right? Where our listeners will send in questions and they want us to answer it on air. And a couple of the other bits that we do is we answer questions that we weren't asked, right? So we'll go to Reddit or different forums and take a martial arts question and give our take on it, as opposed to who they really asked it to, their take. So.
Do you get any feedback on what people like the most? This is part of this thing where we dig we don't care for the bits, but we really love when you guys argue. You said people love the argue part, so you must get some feedback.
Yeah, so we get that, and they we'll always people, oh, this is what I hate on site, or this is what I love on site, like that kind of stuff.
Right, which is important. I think you guys pay attention to what you're doing and what people are reacting to. Like if your goal is to give the audience more of what they want. So
for sure.
Anyway, speaking of that, if you're listening, if you're watching, in the comments now, email ray@podcastersroundtable.com. Do you like that we dig into the guest podcast later or earlier? Let us know. And then we'll head out of here. We did a solid hour 20, so we're round 15 here. How many rounds in jiu-jitsu?
Depends.
Oh, it's not defined like a boxing match.
You could go no time limit. You could go.
How do you win?
Either submission, points, right? Make the guy quit is usually the best way.
Oh, all right. Never give up.
Nope.
Go forever. Awesome. All right. Well, let us know where we can find your podcast, and we'll get out of here. Sheldon, thanks so much, man. First time roundtabler. Really enjoyed it, and I appreciate your time. Where can we find your podcast?
NinjaRob.com. It's on our website, and if you just search Ninja Rob on Apple Podcasts or wherever you look for podcasts, we're the only Ninja Rob out there.
There's the advantage to the non-generic name, right? Like there's the advantage. They own it on Google. Very cool. And Sheldon, where can we find your podcast?
LeadingEquityCenter.com.
Very cool. All right, Dave Jackson, co-host. Thanks, man.
Thanks. This was fun, man. Dave Jackson, schoolofpodcasting.com.
All right. And if you're listening and you're not watching, youtube.com/podcasters roundtable. Check us out. There was, I feel really bad because I chatted earlier. Who was in the chat? Someone was in the chat. They said they'd listened to 100 episodes. Wow. I don't know if it's Colin. I think it's Colin. And he finally showed up live. And I even asked in the chat, what made you show up live? And I think he was listening to a podcast and then he opened YouTube and we were just there. So sometimes you just catch fire and it happens. So thanks for joining us live. Check us out, podcastersroundtable.com. See you next time. Wave goodbye. We're out of here.